So first of all, Maria, thank you so much for having me on. With respect to the third phase of the war and what the IDF plans to do, I'm not a military expert or in the mind of the IDF, but I can tell you what the stated purpose is and in relation to how the war has been going. The IDF says that it is moving into a new phase of its conflict, that it will be reducing the number of ground forces that it has in Gaza, and indeed tens of thousands of troops already have been withdrawn from Gaza and sent home, mostly reservists. Uh, Israel has stated that it has stated its goals repeatedly, that it intends to eliminate Hamas as a military and political organization in Gaza, and that it wants to save the 136 hostages who are still in Hamas dungeons in Gaza. Uh, Israel claims that it has achieved this goal insofar as northern Gaza is concerned, and that it is now focusing on the south, particularly in the area of Khan Yunis, which the IDF at least claims is the current stronghold of Hamas. They believe that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, is stationed there, as well as reportedly many, if not most, of the remaining 136 hostages. Well, so I'm not sure that I would say that Hezbollah hasn't been fighting Israel. Indeed, hundreds of rockets have been fired from Lebanon into northern Israel. Thousands of Israelis have been internally displaced from the north. Entire communities have been destroyed in the north. So I'm not sure it would be accurate to say that Hezbollah hasn't joined the fight. You can also look at the political situation in Lebanon if we're going to talk about why a quote unquote full-scale war, full-scale conflict in the north has not yet erupted. Both Israel and the government of Lebanon have stated that they do not want a war, at least not at this time. Hezbollah, of course, is a proxy terror group of Iran as much as it is a political and military actor in Lebanon. So there's internal issue going on in Lebanon, which may account for why Hezbollah has not ramped up its aggression more than it has already. Ultimately, that falls on likely what Iran wants Hezbollah to do. Iran has likely been as aggressive as Tehran wants Hezbollah to be. We can also, again, though, look at the fact that aggression between Israel and Hezbollah has never really ended. In 2006, when the war between Israel and Lebanon ended, according to UN Resolution 1701, Hezbollah was ordered to withdraw north of the Litani River to create effectively a demilitarized zone. It has not done that, and they were ordered to disarm, which they have done the opposite. They've armed to the tune of hundreds of thousands of rockets, many of them guided with heavy payloads aimed at southern Israel, and often Hezbollah fires rockets from right next to UNIFIL, which is a United Nations interim force in Lebanon positions. So again, I'm not really positive that you could characterize the current aggression in the north as not a war. Again, I'm not sure I would say that that characterization is particularly accurate. I myself have been at two of Secretary of State Blinken's most recent visits to Israel, and you can read about that at themedialine.org. Uh, I'm not sure I would say that the premise of the question is strictly correct, because if we look at the chronology of the conflict, we from the beginning where President Biden made his famous or infamous warning of don't to Iran and other actors in the Middle East, there has been a steady increase in aggression. It it maybe isn't a full-scale regional war, uh, insofar as troops on every side of Israel trying to infiltrate, but there has been a steady increase in aggression. The same thing if we consider uh, the Houthis in Yemen with drone warfare rockets aimed at Israel, again from Hezbollah in the north. This is an Iranian orchestrated attack on Israel from all sides, beginning with Hamas and extending from the north from Hezbollah and from the south from the Houthis. So by all accounts, I'm not sure that this is what containment looks like as opposed to a slow progression of war in the region. Well, the Houthis have essentially declared war on international shipping lanes. So it stands to reason that the United States, the UK, and last I checked, there were some 40 other countries around the world that were getting involved in some way or another to prevent the Houthis from their continued aggression. The definition of genocide, and I'm going to use the legal definition, and I wrote it down here, is a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. This does not include a political group or so-called cultural genocide. If we take this legal framework, and again, Karen Seton, a journalist with the Media Line, has written quite extensively on this, and I urge viewers to go and check out her writing. South Africa has explicitly claimed that Israel is intent on genociding the Palestinians, but there are a number of inconsistencies in the South African arguments which are objectively and observably false. So however compelling the arguments against Israel may be, and many of them are, there are inconsistencies that I think viewers should be aware of. For one, South Africa's case does not address Israel's attack on Hamas. In fact, other than a cursory mention of Hamas in the opening arguments, South Africa has seemingly ignored them altogether. There has been almost no mention of Hamas whatsoever. So Israel has been very consistent in saying that it is attacking Hamas and not the Palestinians. And there's a lot of evidence that Israel has presented to support that case. But they're also, again, saying that the idea that Israel is going into Gaza to genocide the Palestinians negates the fact that Israel responded to an act of war, which Hamas began on October 7th. And not only has Hamas vowed to repeat its offenses, they've broken every ceasefire that they ever signed with Israel, which is in line with their own founding charter, actually. In the Hamas founding charter, Article 13, and again, I'm reading, it says, quote, "There is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. Initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are all a waste of time and vain endeavors." So it's arguable that it is incumbent on Israel to engage with Hamas. Now, South Africa also argues that Israel is attacking civilian infrastructure like mosques and schools and hospitals. Again, South Africa ignores the fact that Hamas is embedding itself within those same civilian infrastructures, including in the safe zones in the south, having fired rockets from those safe zones amidst civilians, which according to the Geneva Convention actually negates, it voids the protections that apply to those safe zones. That's Geneva Convention Article 19. South Africa argues that Israel gave no time for the evacuation orders. Again, this is an observably false assertion. Israel, we could look back, it's a matter of public record. Israel waited 3 weeks before beginning their ground invasion. South African representatives repeatedly made calls, and I watched all 6 hours of the arguments from South Africa's and Israel's arguments. South African representatives repeatedly stated that Israel controls the only two, and I'm quoting, the only two ports of entry with Gaza. That is to ignore the third port of entry, which is Rafah, which is between Gaza and Egypt. They also mentioned that Israel is essentially starving and preventing aid from coming into Gaza. This is objectively false. We can look at a lot of the current aid that's currently flowing into Gaza is actually exceeding pre-war levels. If you look at food, for example, foodstuffs, it's exceeding the pre-war levels. And indeed, international organizations, including UN bodies, have been on record as saying that their largest problem at this point is disseminating the aid once it crosses into Gaza and making sure that Hamas does not steal it from Gazans. And we've seen many reports from Gazans themselves on various news channels and social media saying that they are themselves having trouble keeping their aid from Hamas's hands. Furthermore, again, it's worth noting that that Hamas and Hezbollah have forced the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Israelis. So this is a conflict that has affected both sides in Israel and in Gaza. It's Wars are always asymmetrical, almost always asymmetrical. Israel, no doubt, will use overwhelming force to minimize its own casualties while maximizing Hamas casualties. But whereas civilians are concerned, and again, this goes to the argument that Israel is intentionally genociding the Palestinians, which is the South African assertion in their claims, where the casualty count in Gaza is concerned, if we take the count of 24,000 killed at face value, which is Hamas's numbers, many people are quoting the Gaza Health Ministry, including the UN, but the Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas. If we take that number of 24,000, this number includes terrorists. It includes civilians who were killed by errant rocket fire that was fired by Hamas and by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. For example, the Al Ali Hospital rocket attack that occurred in mid-October, and if we look at the civilian to combatant ratio, the average civilian to combatant ratio in most urban wars in modern history, you're looking at 10 to 1 civilians to combatants. In Gaza, the quoted number of combatants, of Hamas militants who have been killed, is north of 8,000. So if we take 8,000 out of 24, that's 2 to 3 to 1, as opposed to 10 to 1 civilians. So by all accounts, it doesn't seem to meet the standard of genocide, but that's going to be something that that the courts will have to decide, of course. And again, these arguments are not to minimize the horrendous effects of the war on the Palestinians, who no doubt are suffering, and no doubt thousands of civilians have been killed, and that is a tragic, tragic thing. Millions, somewhere close to 2 million Palestinians have been internally displaced, many of them displaced multiple times. This is also a tragedy. Whether or not it meets the definition of genocide is suspect.
Mhm.